This 60,059 area is stunningly important. If this holds, we're all going to breathe a sigh of relief. If this doesn't, it opens up 45. I think if we're talking next week and Bitcoin's 55,000, it's going lower. And if we're talking next week and it's 62,000, it probably held. And I have less oomph on my prediction than I normally do because I think we have such a complicated setup. The Sailor thing is real. MicroStrategy has lost confidence. His perpetuals are trading horribly. What the market doesn't understand is he can sit and do nothing and be fine. He's not a forced seller of Bitcoin anytime soon.
The live price of Bitcoin stands at $59,962.41 per BTC/USD, with a current market cap of $1.2 trillion USD. The 24-hour trading volume sits at $20 billion updated in real time. Bitcoin is down 0.11% over the last 24 hours, with a circulating supply of 20 million coins. Michael Novogratz, founder and CEO of Galaxy Digital, has shared his technical outlook on Bitcoin, pinpointing the $59,000 to $60,000 range as a critical support zone. He states that holding this level would strengthen confidence that the ongoing correction has found its footing, while a decisive break below it could pave the way for a deeper decline toward $45,000. Novogratz currently places the odds at roughly 50-50 between both outcomes. Should Bitcoin slip toward $55,000 in the near term, he anticipates further downside pressure. However, if it manages to hold around $62,000, he believes the support zone has likely been successfully defended. Novogratz also speaks directly to growing concerns surrounding Strategy and Michael Saylor. He argues that while the market is questioning Saylor's position largely because Strategy's perpetual securities have performed poorly, investors are underestimating the company's underlying financial flexibility. Strategy shares closed on Friday at nearly $82, sitting roughly 82% below their peak, as Bitcoin itself slipped to $60,141 and the stock continued to reflect the weight of those losses. On the broader market, Novogratz warns that Bitcoin has faced significant headwinds, with weak investor sentiment, tighter monetary expectations, and renewed momentum behind a stronger dollar, all converging to pressure the cryptocurrency market. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and join us on this journey because you do not want to miss what is coming next.
At a time when crypto in general is underloved, right? People are more and more skeptical about market structure. There's energy elsewhere. The Fed chair, Kevin Warsh, came out hawkish in his first meeting. And then Scott Bessent, surprisingly, out of nowhere, came and piled on and was a strong dollar guy. Strong dollar is weak Bitcoin. And that's the first time we've really heard Bessent, 2 days, yesterday or the day before, come out and make the case for why the strong dollar is good for the U.S. economy. He had it until then, right? They kind of wanted a weaker dollar. And so I think you put all those things together and Bitcoin has been in a world of hurt. I think it's a little too random to figure out they're both in bear markets, right? They're both down a bunch from their highs, right? Let's say Bitcoin's trading at 60, it was 100. Called Bitcoin 50% from the high and gold 45% from the high. I think they'll be correlated at one point. I don't think we have a rate cut cycle close. But what is interesting is you're not going to see as many rate hikes as we would have thought even a month ago because the war's ending, oil's coming down. That's going to give a respite. You'll have some high inflation numbers come through the pipe, but they're not going to be sustainable. And you could see talk of rate cuts by the end of the year, for early next year, not rate hikes. You don't have that talk yet, but I mean, Madame Lagarde already kind of toned down the tension a lot in Europe, right? Where people thought, she was going to have to hike 50, and so we could see in the fall, like the hope for Bitcoin is you get an easier monetary policy. The Chinese come back and start buying. There's a big correlation between Bitcoin and Alibaba. I wish I had looked at this before I owned Alibaba. But you put those charts next to each other. And the Chinese consumer, Chinese investor isn't buying crypto right now, and they're not buying their own stocks. And I think if you see BABA turn, that'll be a nice at least one thing to check for Bitcoin turning. This 60,059 area is stunningly important. If this holds, we're all going to breathe a sigh of relief. If this doesn't, it opens up 45. You know, the cycle guys would say that's my target.
You think we hit 45 before we hit 85?
I think it's a 50-50. I think if we're talking next week and Bitcoin's 55,000, it's going lower. And if we're talking next week and it's 62,000, it probably held. And I have less oomph on my prediction than I normally do because I think we have such a complicated setup. The Sailor thing is real. MicroStrategy has lost confidence. His perpetuals are trading horribly. What the market doesn't understand is he can sit and do nothing and be fine. He's not a forced seller of Bitcoin anytime soon. He's not a forced seller of his own stock. He has plenty of cash to pay his dividends for a while and wait. The market wants to challenge him and put him in pain.
Michael Novogratz highlights that the United States faces intensifying competition from China, which is developing artificial intelligence rapidly and at significantly lower costs. He argues that policymakers must carefully balance building AI responsibly while ensuring the country does not fall behind in the global race, though he remains uncertain whether that balance can realistically be achieved. This concern aligns closely with findings from a recent J.P. Morgan report, which confirms that while the United States continues to dominate the global AI ecosystem, China is emerging as a formidable challenger. The report points to cost-efficient Chinese AI models that are increasingly winning enterprise adoption, particularly within the open-weight and low-cost segments of the market. J.P. Morgan notes that the most cost-efficient tier of the global AI landscape is now being progressively led by Chinese companies. On the investment front, Novogratz argues that while some technology leaders face near-term headwinds, the long-term earnings potential of AI infrastructure companies and hyperscales remains exceptionally strong. Turning to monetary policy, Novogratz praises Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell for consistently maintaining his independence and resisting political pressure in his decision-making. Looking ahead, he believes Kevin Warsh holds the potential to become one of the most effective Federal Reserve leaders in recent memory, pointing to his sound policy judgment and deep understanding of financial markets as the qualities that genuinely distinguish him. Let's get back to the interview.
Politics are going to get worse, not better, around the building of the infrastructure of AI, which is kind of crazy because we need AI for the good stuff too, right? For the medical innovation, and we need it to compete in the world. Like, while I'm not a China is the ultimate enemy guy, China's building AI pretty fast and cheap. And so we're in this tension between how do we do it right and, oh God, we have to do it fast. And I don't know if we're going to be able to ride that wave perfectly, right? That balance, but it's a real tension. Listen, I think the election is a big deal for the markets, and we're going to get closer and closer to it in to November. And I think maybe the market's selling off a little bit here is thinking about that. But you are going to have, you saw Micron earnings where you're going to have the AI guys continue to show these are cash producing machines. I got a call from maybe the single best investor of the last 25 years yesterday. We don't speak often, once every 6 months. And he always calls me when something's happening in crypto. And he was looking at the Bitcoin MicroStrategy thing. And he says, I'm looking at the Apple stock chart breakdown. You saw Apple had to say, hey, we got to raise all our prices because we just can't afford this memory. Margins going down. So Apple's chart looks bad. Apple's one of the great darlings of the market for the last 25 years, right? It's Berkshire's biggest holding had been. And he says, I'm wondering, he said, it's just weird. Like, there's so many things that are making this harder to play. But he said, and then you look at the earnings, he was like, these stocks are, if you look at 27 earnings, are pretty reasonable. If you look at 2030 earnings, they're like dead cheap. The profitability power or possibility of these hyperscalers, of so many things within that chain. And so it's hard to say, that Google's expensive, right? It just isn't. I actually think Jay Powell, he stood up to Trump. He said, you want to fight? I'll fight you publicly. I think Jay Powell deserves a lot of credit for his unwillingness to bend the knee. Fed governors in the long run are looked back on is, did they make the right call at the right time? They're like macro traders. I remember I was sitting with Jean-Claude Trichet, who famously raised rates in 2008, right before the world collapsed, because he wanted to anchor inflation expectations. Like, that was the wrong call. And, he might still argue, and it was the right call. It was absolutely the wrong call. Fed governors have a track record that's auditable. You look back and say, did they make the right move at the right time? And I think, Warsh has a really good shot at being one of those great Fed governors. And his relationship with Besson is a plus, not a negative. Besson has a harder job, right? He's got the hardest boss in the world, and he's got a dysfunctional Congress. And even when they want to function, the president can say, stop functioning, which we just saw in this housing.
Bitcoin stands at a defining crossroads where all prices move and policy decisions carry real weight for the road ahead. The battle between support and breakdown, between AI dominance and global rivalry, and between monetary independence and political pressure are all forces shaping what comes next. For investors looking closely, the signals are clear. The next chapter of this market cycle is already being written, and Bitcoin remains at the center of it all. Will Bitcoin hold its support, or are deeper lows coming? If this gives you clarity on where Bitcoin is headed, hit that like button and subscribe to Bitcoin Frontier Hub. We are brand new to this journey, and every single subscriber brings us one step closer to 1,000. Help us get there and never miss an update that serious investors need to stay ahead.